Welcome to the Vocal Lab. This show aims to pull back the curtain on the entertainment industry and give up-and-coming artists some of the knowledge that veterans wish they'd had when they were just starting out. Sort of a music industry primer, if you will. I could sing before I could talk, and I started working professionally as a singer and voiceover actress at the tender old age of 3. Now, I'm a singer, voice, performance, and growth coach. For over 25 years, I've worked with shy hobby singers, super talented artists signed to record labels, working on big screen productions, coming to me from world-renowned producers, and everything in between. I'm Sarah Ramsey, and it's my calling in life to help artists develop their instrument and their craft while giving themselves permission to become people they love, creating joyful lives and fulfilling careers with their own personal brand of magic. You wrote a musical with Bryan.
I did.
Pretty Woman, the musical, which has enjoyed successful runs in Chicago, New York, and London, and it's currently touring in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
How did that process differ from the more traditional songwriting that you've done in your career?
Oh, boy. It was way different. In fact, you'd asked about things I wish I'd done differently. Well, I don't regret doing it, but I wouldn't do another one. It was so much work. And I've got these letters from 1918. My great uncle was drafted and sent over to the First World War.
Yeah.
And he's probably in a trench in France with mud up to his ankles. And his younger brother is about to be enlisted and is really excited about getting over there because, the war, it sounds like fun. My great uncle wrote to him and said, "Do not enlist." He said, I'm not allowed to say much more than that. Just do not enlist. Because nobody had any idea how horrible it was over there.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about musicals. Don't do it.
Do not enlist.
Yeah. Again, I'm glad I did it. It was an experience. I learned a lot, but how does it differ? So writing a pop song for a pop record, one song can take a day to a week to finish. And there's a bit of writing and rewriting, and you nudge the lyrics, and then you get to a point where you go, great, it's done. And that's it. It goes out the door and hopefully gets recorded and then has a life of its own. Broadway musical. Oh, and the other thing is, writing a pop song, it's to your standards and your co-writer standards. So you police yourself and you please yourself. You write something you like and you're happy with. No one's really telling you what to do, unless the label says we want a ballad or up tempo. But other than that, you're pretty much on your own. With a Broadway musical, the director is the one who is policing you, and the director is the one who has to be pleased. And he's got sometimes some very firm ideas about what he wants, and sometimes he doesn't have firm ideas, but he's not going to tell you that. He's just going to keep, flogging you until he hears something he likes. So it was 3 years of pretty much, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but it was pretty much 3 years of 12-hour days, 7-day weeks. It was relentless. And
it's a long time.
It was a lot of work. It was a huge amount of work. And in the beginning, it was kind of fun and challenging because we'd write a song, and Pretty Woman was a movie. So you've got the script, you know the movie, and we just kind of went through it, in a linear way. You start with the opening number, and you read the script, you look at the movie, you have meetings and talk about it, you go away and write an opening number. And so we kind of worked our way through the script and wrote songs. And then the rewriting begins. So you've written, and then it's rewriting. So the director says, this song is okay, but I need a different lyric. This song doesn't work at all. I need a new song. And that went on for about 2.5 years of rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And that's what got really frustrating. And I was reminded of a carpenter friend of mine who did some work at my house. And he said, he was telling me about a difficult client that he had. And he said, I can build you a bookshelf and do a really good job the first time. And if you ask me to rip it out and do it again, I'll do a pretty good job the second time. But if you ask me to rip it out and do it again, my heart's not really going to be in it the third time. And that's kind of how I felt on this Broadway musical journey. By the time we got, almost 3 years into it, I was done. I was just so burned out. And well, I thought I was done. So then it goes, then it goes into the theater. Yeah. And we were in Chicago for 6 weeks. That was what they call out of town previews. So it ran in Chicago for 3 weeks. And after every show, every night, there'd be a meeting and the director would say, it wasn't all music, it would be like, I need a different spotlight over here. And that piece of scenery needs to not come out. And then there'd be, comments about the songs and the lyrics, and we'd make changes. And then the show went to New York, and it was there for a year. And not a whole lot of changes. It was pretty much as written. And then it went to London. And for some reason in London, the director started to get a little antsy again, and wanted a few changes. And I remember one time in particular, he said to me, Bryan wasn't there, but he said to me a few weeks into the London run, he said, I need an entirely new song for the opening of Act 2. And by this time, we're 4 years in, and I think over the course of the project, we'd written the opening number for Act 2, maybe 5 different songs, and each one had gone through rewrites. Yeah. So he said to me in London, I think we need a new number, the opening of Act 2. And I just said, no. And that was it.
It's funny. It never occurred to me that, and I'm probably not alone out there, but I think of, through the rehearsal process and, like working a show up, yes, there's going to be musical changes and whatever. And then you go into tech rehearsals and there still might be some changes there. But then like in my head, once you hit opening night and it's like the show is up, we're not making changes to the script or the music, like the book or the music might make some staging changes, but like in my head, the book and the music, that's done now.
Yeah, not the case, at least not in my case. I mean, it was always fluid, I mean, not a lot of changes, but, that was no small request 4 years in for an opening new song for Act 2, Yeah. That was a biggie. But I'm proud of it. I with some objectivity, so I hadn't seen it for a while. And the tour, the UK tour, it's like a week in Bristol, week in Birmingham, week in Liverpool. And I flew up to Glasgow to see the show up there. I'd seen the cast rehearse in London, just in a rehearsal hall, but I hadn't seen them on stage. And this was a new cast. The London cast, the show had closed, and this was a whole new cast, so a whole new show for the tour. So I went and saw them in Glasgow, and I really enjoyed it because I'd had enough space that I could kind of just, almost listen to it like it was someone else's work, and it was really enjoyable.
That's great. Yeah. What do you think creates a career with longevity?
Wow. Well, certainly passion that I mentioned before. You got to love it. You got to love what you do. Yeah. And I think there's some clinical OCD involved, I think I've always felt compelled to write music. Yeah. It's like, you gotta get it out. It was always like ideas in my head. It was almost distracting and disturbing. There was always a melody or a lyric or something that you're sitting, having friends over for dinner, or you're watching a movie, or you're driving, or having a shower, and it's there,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to get it out. So, yeah, I mean, it finds you,
Yeah.
But I just have always loved doing it, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to look back over my life, and the only job I've ever had is music.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful and so lucky to say that.
That's a pretty special and rare thing to be able to say.
It is.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it alone. So many people all along the way, from your dad to Bryan to Ozzy to Stephen. I mean, all these people along the way have been so generous and so inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
So I really credit them too. So yeah, longevity is, again, making the right choices, knowing an opportunity when you see it,
mm-hmm.
work ethic, putting in the time, the hours, just doing it.
Yeah.
And caring deeply, the bar is high.
I think that piece around the sort of self-discipline and the consistency that's required to make a career, in the music industry, I think people see it through the lens of it's like super cool to be a rock star and you get to live the rock star life. And that behind the scenes, it doesn't really look that way, though. There's really a lot of work involved, and it requires a lot of consistency and dedication and self-discipline to put one foot in front of the other all the time to keep moving forward.
Yeah. And people who do things well. I remember seeing Gretzky, Wayne Gretzky play hockey. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing Michael Jordan play basketball. And they are so good. They actually make it look easy.
Yeah.
It's Gretzky just looked like he was, not floating. Even trying. Yeah. Just so amazing. And I think there's some of that too. If I think what we do, I think people look at music and go, oh, easy. Mm. I've had a couple of funny emails over the years. My website, my email address is on my website, so I occasionally get emails. And I got an email once from an air traffic controller in Australia. and he said, you know what, I've always, wanted to be a songwriter. He said, I like my job, but, I just have always wanted to be a songwriter. Is there any chance, he said, I've got some ideas. Is there any chance of you and me co-writing? And I wrote him back and said, what a coincidence. I've always wanted to be an air traffic controller. I said, how about I'll write a song with you and then you let me sit in on one of your air traffic control shifts. And he wrote back and said, well, you can't do that. It takes years of training. Yeah. So, you got to laugh. But I think some people think what we do is easy. Yeah. And it's not. Yeah. Especially not you can have one hit, and lots of bands and lots of songwriters have one hit. Yeah. And then never again. Not for lack of trying, not for lack of wanting to, but, so to have enough to sustain a long career, I mean, it's hard work. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about first off, I should back up. Your songwriting process, is that, so for the people who aren't familiar with how these processes kind of work, and it is different for different artists. So I'm just how yours plays into this. When you are writing with an artist, that is purely a writing session versus you are in the studio while they're recording, or does that ever cross over?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the studio process when you're involved in that and how that looks for you? And that may be different artist to artist as well. But
yeah, well, I mean, from the songwriting through to the recording, I mean, sometimes I can remember one song Brian and I wrote for Joe Cocker called When the Night Comes. So Brian and I always did really concise demos. So we'd write a song, and then in my studio, we'd record it, just my home studio. We'd record it with the guitars, the drums, the bass, all the parts that we envisioned. And we sent it off. And we eventually heard Joe Cocker's version of it, which was produced by a guy named, strange name. His last name was Midnight, Charlie Midnight. And wow, they'd taken what we had done and just took it to a whole other level with, female gospel backing vocals and just a crackerjack performance from the studio players. And I was just so pleased, because you never know. You send it out there. And there have been times where you hear the final version, you go, gosh, didn't they listen to our demo? So it's always great when you can follow through the whole process. So, in Brian's case, with Bryan Adams Records, the studio, we do the demo, just Brian and I. Then we go to his band and they learn the parts. And, they're certainly permitted to, put their 2 bits in and their style. But Brian and I stay very rigid and adhered to our original arrangements because we put a lot of thought into it. And it's nice to have that access right through to the final product. So that's my preference. And with Aerosmith too, I was in the studio for a few things. Played on some of their tracks, played organ on one track and bass on another. So
that's very cool.
I like to be involved all the way through, but it's not always possible.
Yeah. I think that like, to be honest with you, I wasn't even sure, because as a songwriter who isn't also the performing artist, that could go a lot of different ways, right?
And it has done. And it's like I say, it's everything from, gosh, didn't they listen to the demo, to, wow, they've just taken it to a whole other level. And you never really know. I mean, you know what? 9 times out of 10, it's been great. I can't point to too many where it was like totally disappointing.
And I know, like, some artists write in the studio, so they sort of write and record in the same wave, right?
Yeah.
And have you ever been part of that kind of a process, or is it always a 2-step process for you?
It's pretty much 2-step. Yeah. Write it, demo it, and then it goes to the band.
Yeah. So working as a songwriter and being a gigging musician probably play out a little bit differently in your personal life. How do you think choosing the pathway of songwriter worked better for you? And I know you alluded to this a little bit at the beginning, but those are very different, like, lifestyle choices, right? And they impact family and all of that. So do you want to talk about that a bit?
Well, I mean, I've had different stages of my career as a writer and as a musician. So, like I said, all through high school, played in bands, weekend dances and so on. And then in my 20s, Vancouver had a robust club scene. So there, in the 1970s, there were 30 clubs in sort of Vancouver and environs. And I was in couple of different club bands, and it was the Sam Feldman network. Sam Feldman was a booking agent, and he had a stable of bands, and you would just rotate. You'd go start at club number 1 and go all the way around to club number 30 and then start at club number 1 again. And he had like 30 bands doing that. So I was very, very busy in the 70s as a working musician. So that was usually like 9 p.m. till 1 a.m. or 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. That was kind of the club hours. And then with your dad, I started getting session work and started getting really busy. They were calling me almost every day, which was great. And then I met Bryan and started writing. So there was a period of time in the late 70s, early 80s. There was a period of time where this wasn't a typical day, but there were days where I'd I was living in West Van. I'd drive over the bridge for a 9:00 jingle, and I'd be in the studio from, say, almost 9 till 11. Drive back across the bridge, meet Bryan at noon. He and I would write till 8:00, have dinner, and I'd go downtown again and play at a club from 10 till 2, and then get up the next morning and drive across the bridge for a jingle at 9. So I had a couple of years like that until I had to prioritize. I had to go, wait a minute. And Bryan and I were starting to get a bit of success as writers, and I just needed the time and energy to do that.
Yeah.
And by this time, I stopped doing the nightclub stuff. And by this time, drum machines had kind of come into the picture. So, there was not as much need for drummers or string machines, that there weren't enough, they weren't using real string players, and synthesizers really, started happening. So I kind of bowed out as a drummer, and then just concentrated, like then Bryan and I would get together at noon and work till midnight every day. So then it was like 12 hours of just writing and less and less playing. I mean, the playing I did was on our demos. That was kind of where I did most of my playing.
Yeah. I just have to say that I feel you on the bridge because when I was young, we lived in West Van, right out in Caulfield too. And my mom was singing jingles, and my dad, obviously. So there was one day when she drove across the bridge to sing a jingle, had to drive back for something. And anyway, whatever it was, she ended up driving across the bridge, I don't know, I think it was 3 trips in and out of Vancouver. And she got home that night and said to my dad, we have to move.
Truly,
and that's when we did move into Vancouver, because it was just, that commute got ridiculous.
It was brutal. Yeah.
Is there anything that you see often missed or misunderstood by artists or writers or, folks in the music business?
Gosh. I mean, can you be more specific? I can't.
It's a pretty open-ended question. I mean, it's
missed.
I think sometimes people come on the scene with some preconceived notions that are out of place, or there's, they, haven't sort of learned the etiquette of the business yet, or it can be, whatever.
I mean, I think of all the artists. I mean, everyone I worked with wasn't, already famous like Ozzy or Aerosmith. I did work with a lot of young artists that were just trying to get a foot in the door. And maybe they had a manager or a record company who thought they were worth nurturing. And some of them ended up having careers like Glass Tiger. Yeah. Literally a bunch of teenage garage band guys from Northern Ontario who I thought were great, and, wrote a couple of hits with them. And they're right out of the gate, they just had the talent and the energy to do that. But I there was other artists, young artists, and it's back to this never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity thing. Yeah. So they just didn't get it. You're writing with them, and it's kind of like painting a picture. Like, say if Da Vinci had a collaborator, they each had a brush. One guy goes up to the, another guy goes up the canvas, and another guy goes up the canvas, and you get to a point where you kind of stand back and go, okay, we're done. So it's a great picture. And then after dinner, the other guy comes back and starts to paint some more. I had a number of those experiences where the collaborator just didn't quite understand when we were done. Yeah. And didn't understand that was a really hooky thing on the guitar. Is that the song needs that? Yeah. So it's the smart part that I was talking about, and I don't mean intelligence. I just mean the ability to see what's needed, to play the game and to get that song on that album so that it will sell and you can pay your rent, all of that part of the game.
And do you think those are things that come sort of as a function of being a little more green in the industry and they get learned over time, or or more sort of like some people get it, some people don't?
I don't know. Like I said, I met Bryan when he was 18, living with his mom. He didn't have a plan B. Actually, he didn't even have a plan A. It was just like he loved music, and he was tenacious and talented and wanted it pretty bad. And he understood. He had instincts and intuition and understanding. So you can learn it, you can get better at it, but if you don't get it, sometimes you're never going to get it.
Yep.
And I had a few, like I said, I had a few of those experiences where I just knew they're never going to get it because they were not thinking smart, not focused, And not to say I am every time out either, but gosh, you gotta, and a lot of times writing songs is not just writing, it's also just sitting and talking with the collaborator too, talking it through and kind of mapping it out. What do you want to write about? What do we want to say here? And then just doing the work and then going back and looking at it again. Like one of my most successful songs, I wrote it with Bryan. It's called Summer of '69. And we wrote that song in, January 1984. And it wasn't called Summer of '69. It was called Best Days of My Life. That was, if you know the song, those were the best days of my life. And the phrase Summer of '69 didn't follow. It stopped right there. Best days of my life. And so we called the song Best Days of My Life. And way buried in the first verse, on my first real six string, played at the 5 and dime, played until my fingers bled. It was the summer of '69. So that phrase appeared in the song, but it was just a phrase in the first verse, no big deal. And weeks and months later, we had another listen to the song, and we went, I don't think Best Days of My Life is the best title. We gotta up our game here. And so we thought Summer of '69. That sounds good. Summer of '69 just rolls off the tongue. So we just took that phrase and shoehorned it into a few places in the song. Those are the best days of my life in the summer of '69. We just put that in, and it changed the whole song. So it was just, the first thing you write isn't necessarily the best thing.
Yep.
And I've encountered that with other writers too. They think they maybe it's ego. They think because I wrote it, it's good. And so the first thing that comes out of their mouth, that's it. And it's sacred and they don't want to change it. You have to, like I said, police yourself and please yourself. You got to look down at your own work, objectively and be brutally critical. And also know when you've done good work. Know when to step away from the canvas and stop painting. Know when it's done.
Both sides of that coin, right?
Yeah.
When to keep going and when to stop. And I think it's something I see with students who come in, because I teach a lot of professional singers and aspiring artists. So there's a lot of people working with original music.
Yeah.
And I talk about that piece a lot, that, you might have a great bridge, but it's not a bridge. It should function as a different part of the song. Or you might have a good verse, but you don't have a chorus yet. But you have to be objective enough to consider that, and not just because you finished writing a song doesn't mean that song is finished.
Yeah.
Right. And look, I think that's a skill that you have to learn in the process.
It is. And learn or not, because some people never get it. So there's, like I say, there's sort of intuition involved. Yeah.
If you were going to give somebody advice on who wanted to become a songwriter or up their chops as a songwriter, what would you tell them as far as increasing that learning or that skill?
Again, it depends what your plan is. I mean, you mentioned earlier, like there's singer-songwriters and they're just songwriters. So I knew early on that I was not an artist. I mean, I don't have a singing voice. I didn't get that gift. So I knew I needed a vehicle. And, early on it was Prism, my first band that I wrote songs for. And then when I left that band, I was still writing, but I needed to find someone. And fortunately I ran into Bryan and he was, the guy that sung, the songs that he and I eventually wrote. So I think collaboration is a really wonderful thing. So if you have lyrical strengths and, a little bit lacking on the melody side, or if you have strong melodic and chordal strengths and lacking on the lyrical side, find a partner, find someone else or find a young artist like I did with Bryan. It was, no guarantee that things were going to happen, but I knew that I had like I said, a talented, tenacious guy. And I knew he was going somewhere. I didn't know where, but he was going somewhere. And I wanted to, share that journey with him. So, if you can't sing, find a singer. If you can't write lyrics, find a lyricist. Just partner with someone and then just make a plan and go for it. Just be ambitious and be hardworking. Work ethic is such a big part of it.
Yeah.
And again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's not easy. It's really hard work, but you got to love it. You got to love it.
Yep, absolutely. And in that spirit of collaboration, like obviously you've worked with tons of artists over the course of your career, in a very collaborative manner that comes from a place of community and mutual respect and support rather than competition. And I think this is something that I tend to talk, a question I ask most of the guests that I have on the show. I think people perceive the music industry as a very competitive industry, and in many ways it is. But I think a lot of the people on the inside of the industry don't necessarily see it through that same lens, meaning it feels a lot more community and a lot more collaborative and sharing each other's successes kind of thing. What has your experience been with that? And how do you think we can continue to foster a more collaborative community?
Yeah, it really does feel like a community. I've always felt that I was in special company,
Yeah.
I used to love the social aspect of doing jingles, arriving at the studio and seeing the other, singers and players. And it was a really special part of my day, socially. And then you got serious and made some music. And I've never felt competitive. I never felt like I had somebody got my job, or it was always collaborative and supportive. Everyone's supportive of everyone else. And, it's a community. It's a brotherhood, sisterhood, mutual support thing. And I love that about what we do.
Yeah, I do as well. What is the most unexpected way that you have used your talents in the course of your career?
Whoa, what a question. Unexpected way. I wish you'd sent me that question
ahead of time.
Because that's a tough one. Wow. I mean, maybe Tears Are Not Enough, the song we wrote for African famine relief. I mean, that was a little bit of out of left field. I was actually at Little Mountain Sound. So there was Studio A and Studio B. And I was there for a jingle. And I was in the lobby on the main floor, just waiting for the jingle to start. And David Foster was in Studio B with producing the Payolas. And David came bursting out of Studio B into the lobby looking like panicked. And he went, "Jim, you have a home studio." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, we need to write and demo a song. What are you doing tonight?" I went, and he said he had just got off the phone with Quincy Jones, who had just finished We Are the World with Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie and Springsteen, Dylan, everybody. And if Quincy had phoned David and said, "Can you do a Canadian song? We're doing an album of fundraising songs for African famine relief." So David, literally, I just happened to be the first person he saw.
Just on the other side of the door.
Yeah. So that was a Monday. David came over that night. We wrote a lot of the bed of the song and some of the lyrics. Bryan was on tour, but he came back the next day and he came over and helped us finish the song. That was Tuesday. I don't know how this happened, but by Sunday, we were all in Toronto with Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Geddy Lee, Gordon Lightfoot, and we recorded the song. I mean, it was remarkable. I mean, Bruce Allen, the manager, put all that together. I don't know how, but that was really unexpected and of course magical. I mean,
and a crazy fast turnaround time.
Yeah. I honestly, I still think back on that. Like, how did we do that? But when you want to do something really bad, you can make it happen.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't hurt to have some connected people involved in the project.
Truly, yeah.
To grease those wheels, huh?
Yeah, David and Bruce. No, truly,
yeah. Is there anything else that you think is really important for up and coming artists or songwriters to know that we haven't touched on today?
I think just how hard it is, and harder now than ever. I mean, back when I was starting out, there was more opportunities. The record companies had budget. They would sign artists on spec. Like they'd sign 20 artists with the idea that maybe 3 of them were ever going to have a career, but at least the other 17 got a shot. Yeah. Nowadays it's just so, first of all, everybody's doing it. You go online and everybody's writing songs and recording, and it's just, there's just so much out there and so hard to get noticed. And record companies expect you to arrive with finished product. They don't have any budget for development. So I mean, I'm a little out of the loop these days. The old business model, I'm well versed in, pre-Napster, where, you wrote a song, it got recorded, people went to the store and bought it. Now it's like you write a song, you record it, and gosh, it's a mystery to me, the whole Spotify, iTunes thing, and so non-transparent, the how the money flows. I honestly don't understand it. So I'm kind of the wrong guy to ask in 2024, how to navigate this whole new business model, because it really does baffle me. But I think if anything hasn't changed, it's, a good song is still a good song. Yep. And you know what? If you love it and you believe and you aren't afraid to work harder than the next guy, then go for it. Yeah. But it's harder now than it was then. Yeah. So, like I said, you can either quit or try harder, and I'm all for trying. I'm all for trying harder.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today, Jim. It has been a pleasure to hang out with you and pick your brains a bit and talk shop.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been a joy. Thank you so much.